Alright, let's see if we're live. I think we are. Oh gosh. Where are we? Okay, we are in fact live. I think we are.
白岩学園3年 B 組の皆さん、こんにちは。
All right. Good morning. So, I can go back to the main. So, today I was browsing Poll, of all things. The website Poll, obviously, not Jonathan Poll. It's hard to browse Poll, Jonathan. I don't know how one would do that. Anyway, so I was on the website Poll, and there is a thread about it's okay to be white. And as we all know, there's a weird, I guess it's turning into a tradition, though I'm not sure. It started in 2017. I did not participate, which made me very sad, but I did participate in 2018, and here I am. As retarded as it might sound, I am going to participate again. It seems a bit silly for a 40-year-old man to be putting up stickers, but I can't help it. It's a lot of fun. It's actually really a lot of fun. So of course I'm going to. Anyway, there is a like a rival concept, I suppose. Something about Islam is right about women, which I will admit is really, really funny. I do... Oh, hey, Marge. How's it going, buddy? I do like that meme because it forces feminists to confront their retarded identity politics. So it is funny. It's massively triggering, and I do like it. However, white people are basically under siege right now. And even though Islam... Well, I mean... Islam does... I mean, the Islam question, rather, really does highlight the demographic issue if you live in Europe, but it doesn't really work here in America. Here in America, we are being inundated with Mexicans, and in both Europe and in America, whites are being demographically replaced by a new population. So the Islam is right about women meme, I think that works really well on college campuses where there happens to be a Muslim population. And outside of that one context, I don't think it's terribly or rather, it's not... It doesn't have the same universality as it's okay to be white. So, you know, I was saying yesterday that, like, yeah, I'm not trying to advocate that people put up stickers, and I feel like I'm right on the verge of advocating that people put up the stickers, but that's genuinely not what I'm going for. What I'm going for here is more in my own head. I'm trying to figure out what are the good things to say and focus on, and what are the irrelevant things to say and focus on. And I kind of agree with, there's something that I heard Milo Yiannopoulos say way back in like early 2017, and it was something to the effect of Islam is basically the flu, and your body can fight off the flu relatively easily, but it's really hard to fight off the flu when you've got AIDS, and communism is AIDS. And I thought that was a reasonable sentiment, a very reasonable sentiment, and I kind of agree with it, in as much as the whole deal with Islam is that they only have the power that is given to them by well, basically people that support them. Outside of that, like, they don't believe in democracy. They don't really believe in assuming seats of power. People like what's his face, something or other Khan, right, the guy, the mayor of London. There are a couple in various areas of European, government structures here and there, but not terribly common. Talib, Omar, and a couple of others. Again, these are relatively rare, and they don't seem to have, again, in terms of flexing political power, they don't seem to hold too much power. So it would actually be very easy, if you stop and think about it, to just decide to ban them, essentially. And like, what could they don't have any seats of power, so whatever, their idea of power comes from the mosques. That's basically, like, you can almost think of like, imagine the Zerg in StarCraft. Mosques are basically the hives, and that's where most of the action is. So that's just the way that I see it. They operate on a completely different wavelength, like a totally different wavelength. Anyhow, the reason that I bring all of that up is because the whole Islam thing, like, again, it's kind of a thing in Europe, but it's less of a thing in America. And the good thing about It's Okay to Be White is that it unifies the message in such a way that you can put up the exact same meme on a lamppost in Paris as in here in Los Angeles, and it means the same thing. You can do the same thing in Perth, and you can also put it up in Spain. It's the same meaning. It's exactly the same meaning as where if you were to put up Islam is right about women in South Central Los Angeles, where it's now basically Mexican people, like no one's going to care. No one's going to bat an eyelash. They don't really give a shit because it's completely outside of anything that is going on in South Central Los Angeles. It's pretty much like Little Tijuana down there. So it's a meaningless sentiment out there. So yeah, the thing that I'm going for here is that I think that having universal and unified messages is absolutely the way to go. You know, I think, and I've talked about it before, and maybe I should be formal about it, but having like real talking points is completely a thing that we should be all about. Yeah, exactly. It's okay to be a gringo. Yeah, I like that. Let's see, was Max right about the gems? I don't know. Which Max are we talking about? Well, at any rate. So, yeah, I think we should have talking points, like actual talking points. The white nationalist hearings, I still have to go back and listen to them. I've been a little bit busy here and there. It's hard to explain, I'm sure. Whatever. Anyway, I do need to get back to the hearings, and I think I am just going to go ahead and do like a very basic analysis, the most basic possible analysis of the hearings, with the idea that I have heard shockingly little about them, but I think they're laying down the groundwork for what they're going to do. They are telegraphing what they're going to be forcing onto us if they get their way over the next, decade or two. So, I mean, what they already have forced on us, and then what they're going to do to us if we object, basically. So, I do think that it's worth looking into these hearings. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So there you go. Anyway, so that about that's my first thought for the day, and I was thinking about doing it in the next starting it off in the next couple of days, but I think I kind of want to start it now. I'm a little bit impatient with regards to the book, so what I'm actually going to I'm going to go and grab it. One moment. Okie doke, everyone can hear my horrible ancient chair from God knows how long ago. So I have in front of me a copy of Kolyma Tales by Varlam Shalamov. And let me read right under the title. It says, "One of the calmest and most terrifying reports on the Gulag Archipelago by a survivor." Oof. And on the back, it says this. In 1937, Varlam Shalamov was arrested by the Soviet secret police for the crime of declaring that the Nobel Prize laureate Ivan Bunin was a, quote, classic author, end quote, of Russian literature. Shalamov spent 17 years in the Kolyma region of northeastern Siberia, an area where 3 million people are estimated to have been murdered. He survived those 17 years and has documented life in these camps in powerful stories. Alexander Solzhenitsyn asked Shalamov to co-author the Gulag Archipelago with him, but Shalamov, already sick and old, refused. Solzhenitsyn has written of these stories, quote, Shalamov's experience in the camps was longer and more bitter than my own, and I respectfully confess that to him and not me was it given to touch those depths of bestiality and despair toward which life in the camps dragged us all. Solzhenitsyn has also said that when he first came across an anthology of Shalamov's poetry, he, quote, trembled as if he were meeting a brother, end quote. In this book, John Glad has selected a number of Shalamov's stories, those that seemed most compelling to him, and those that presented the greatest variety of experience. They are vivid accounts of individual moments in the lives of men whose hopes and plans extended no further than a few hours. This is the first appearance of the stories in English. So there you go. That's what we are going to read. And let's see, I'm going to look and see. Okay, so the first, let's see here, part 1 is survival. There's a foreword. Forward is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so John Glad wrote a foreword in 1979, 9 pages. And then there is the first story, Survival, which begins on page 22, and I think it ends on page 26. So let's see here. Survival 22, yeah, to 26. So it looks like, and then the next one is from 26 to 29. So I think I should be able to get through 2 stories tonight. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through 1 story, possibly 2. I'm not sure, but that's what we're looking at. And this here paperback, it looks like I've got. I'm not sure what edition, but it looks like it was printed in 1980, so it's an older book. All right, now then, what I'm going to do is I am going to get myself mentally and emotionally prepared to do some reading. So I think what I'll do is play some music that has a nice vibe that approximates what I think we may end up listening to. Where are we? AIM, LM. Oh, there we are. Yeah. These are, well, let's see, that's not actually going to work out. Well, that's too bad. I want to find something that's got something close to it. Okay, alright. That's getting much closer. These are very long tracks, though, so maybe I don't want to play those. Oh, yeah, those are huge. Those are gargantuan, son of a gun. Okay, well, I guess I can't find anything that, like, actually, because I kind of know the music that I want to play, but the problem is that all those tracks are, like, way too long. They're perfect. They're absolutely perfect, but they're just too long. So I think what I'll do instead is play something a bit shorter, massively shorter. And again, I'm just now I'm just trying to find something that's kind of in the area. That's not too bad. That's not too bad, actually. I think I'll play this one. I'm going to play this one. This is actually no, you know what I'm going to play? I'm going to play the Hollywood one, if I can find it. because there is one track that is actually genuinely perfect. I want to see if I can find it. There we are. I'm going to play this one. This is the one that I'm going to play. Okay, so this is, I believe it's something about, where are we? Let me check it one more time. Hollywood Burns. There we are. This is Hollywood Burns, and this is a little bit closer to what I envision the book to end up being. So this is sort of my lead into October, where it's going to be spooky streaming, basically. So here we go, Hollywood Burns. All right, so that was good old Hollywood Burns. Freaking love that track. Great track. And I guess this is it. We're gonna move directly into the book Kolima Tales. We're gonna move into part 1. King Kush. Yeah, I might play some Bork. That'd be perfect. Nothing says trials and tribulations like Bjork banging on about God knows whatever the hell she's usually going on about. Okay, so this is the very first story. I honestly have no idea what I'm about to dip my toes into, so this is just going to be a straight ahead reading with zero preparation. So here we go. This is the first story of Kolima Tales by Varlam Shalamov. And the story is entitled A quote pushover end quote job. So a pushover job is the title of this story. The hills glistened white with a strange tinge of blue, like loaves of sugar. Round and bare of forest, they were smothered with a layer of dense snow, compacted by the winds. In the ravines of the snow was deep, in the ravines of the snow was deep and firm. Okay, it's just a strange sentence, that's fine. A man could stand on it. But on the slopes, it swelled up in enormous blisters. These were shrubs of Siberian dwarf cedar, which lay flat on the ground to hibernate through the winter, even before the first snow fell. They were what we had come for. Of all northern trees, I loved the dwarf cedar most of all. I had long since come to understand and appreciate the enviable haste with which poor northern nature shared its meager wealth with equally indigent man, blossoming for him with every variety of flower. There were many times when everything bloomed in a single week, and when only a month after the beginning of summer and almost never setting sun would make the mountains flame red with cowberries, and then darken with their deep blue. Rowan shrubs hung heavy with full watery berries, so low you didn't even have to raise your hand. Only the petals of the mountain sweetbriar smelled like flowers here. All the others exuded a sense of dampness, a swampy odor, and this seemed appropriate to the spring silence, both of the birds and the large forest whose branches slowly clothed themselves in green needles. The sweetbriar clung to its fruit right into winter, and from under the snow stretched out to us its wrinkled, meaty berries, whose thick violet skin concealed a dark yellow flesh. I knew of the playful vines which again and again changed their color in spring, from dark rose to orange to pale green, as if they were stretched with dyed kidskin. The slender fingers of the larch, with their green fingernails, seemed to grope everywhere, and the omnipresent oily fireweed carpeted the scenes of former forest blazes. My gosh, I am terrible at tongue twisters. Okay, moving on. All this was exquisite, trusting, boisterous, rushed, but all this was in summer, when dull green grass mixed with the glaze of mossy boulders that gleamed in the sun and seemed not gray or brown, but green. In winter it all disappeared, covered with crusty snow cast into the ravines by the winds and beaten down so hard that to climb upward a man had to hack steps in the snow with an axe. Everything was so naked that a person in the forest could be seen half a mile away, and only one tree was always green, always alive, the dwarf cedar. The tree was a weatherman. 2 or 3 days before the first snow, in the cloudless heat of fall, when no one wanted even to think of the oncoming winter, the dwarf cedar would suddenly stretch out its enormous 5-yard paws on the ground, tightly bend its straight black 2-fisted thick trunk, and lie prone on the earth. A day or 2 would pass and a cloud would appear. Toward evening a snowstorm would begin. And if in the late fall low gray snow clouds would gather accompanied by a cold wind, and the dwarf cedar did not lie down, one could be sure that no snow would fall. Toward the end of March, or in April, when there was still no trace of spring, and the air was dry and rarefied as in winter, the dwarf cedar would suddenly rise up, shaking the snow from its reddish-green clothing. In a day or 2, the wind would shift, and warm streams of air would usher in spring. The dwarf cedar was a very precise instrument, sensitive to the point where it sometimes deceived itself, rising during a lengthy period of thaw, but it would hurriedly lie back in the snow before the cold returned. Sometimes we would make a hot campfire in the morning to last till evening, so we could warm our hands and feet. We would heap on as many logs as possible and set off to work. In 2 or 3 hours the dwarf cedar would stretch its branches out from under the snow and slowly right itself, thinking that spring had arrived. Before the fire could even go out, the tree would again lie back into the snow. Winter here is two-toned, a high pale blue sky and the white ground. Spring would lay bare the dirty yellow rags of fall, and the earth would be clothed in this beggar's garb for a long time, until the new greenery would gather its strength and begin to blossom furiously. In the midst of this pitiless winter and gloomy spring, the dwarf cedar would gleam blindingly green and clear. Moreover, tiny cedar nuts grew on it, and this delicacy was shared by people, birds, bears, squirrels, and chipmunks. Having selected an area of the hill shielded from the wind, we dragged a considerable number of small and large branches into a heap and gathered some dry grass where the wind had bared the mountain. We had brought several smoking logs with us from the barracks stove. There were no matches here. We carried the logs in a large tin can with a wire handle attached, and had to be careful that they didn't go out along the way. Removing the charred logs from the can, we blew on them and set the smoldering ends together. I kept blowing until they began to burn, and then I set them on dry grass and twigs. Let's see here, I'm not sure. For some reason, I'm not sure how they started the fire, and I thought that I missed it. Whatever, I'll keep reading, though. I kept blowing until they began to burn, and then I set them on the dry grass and twigs. All this we covered with larger branches, and soon an uncertain tail of blue smoke trailed downwind. I had never before worked in gangs that gathered dwarf cedar needles. We did everything by hand, plucked the green dry needles and stuffing them into sacks. In the evening we handed them over to the foreman. The needles were hauled away to a mysterious, quote, vitamin factory, end quote, where they were boiled down into a dark yellow viscous extract with an inexpressibly repulsive taste. Before each dinner this extract had to be drunk or eaten, however a person could manage. Its taste spoiled not only dinner but supper as well, and many considered this, quote, treatment, end quote, a supplementary means of camp discipline. But without a shot glass of this medicine, it was impossible to get dinner in the cafeteria. The rule was strictly enforced. Scurvy was everywhere, and dwarf cedar was the only medically approved cure. It was ultimately proved that this preparation was completely ineffective in the cure of scurvy, and the, quote, vitamin factory, end quote, was closed. Nevertheless, faith conquers all, and at the time many drank the stinking abomination, went away spitting, but eventually recovered from scurvy. Or they didn't recover, or they didn't drink it and recovered anyway. Everywhere were enormous clumps of sweetbriar, but no one prepared it or used it against scurvy, since the instructions from Moscow said nothing about sweetbriar. Parenthetical, a few years later sweetbriar was brought in from, quote, mainland, end quote, but it was never prepared locally, end parenthetical. The instructions prescribed cedar needles as the only source of vitamin C. On that day, I was assigned to gather the precious raw material. I had gotten so weak that I was transferred from the gold mine to needle packing. Quote, I'll put you on dwarf cedar for a while, end quote, the job assigner told me in the morning. Quote, it'll be a pushover job for a few days, end quote. Quote, needle picking, end quote, was considered not just an easy job, but the easiest of all. Moreover, it didn't require the presence of a guard. After many months of work in the icy mines, where every sparklingly frozen stone burned the hands, after the clicks of rifle bolts, the barking of dogs, the swearing of the overseers behind our backs, needle gathering was an enormous pleasure, physically felt with every exhausted muscle. Needle gatherers were sent out after the others while it was still dark. It was a marvelous feeling to warm your hands against the can with the smoldering logs and slowly set out for the seemingly unattainable peaks, to climb higher and higher, constantly aware of your own solitariness and the deep winter silence of the mountains. It was as if everything evil in the world had been snuffed out, and only you and your companion existed on this narrow, endless path, this dark, narrow, endless path in the snow, leading upward into the mountains. My companion watched my slow motions disapprovingly. He had been gathering cedar needles for a long time, and correctly surmised me in a weak, clumsy partner. Work was done in pairs, and the, quote, wage, end quote, was a joint one, divided 50-50. Quote, I'll chop and you pick, end quote, he said, quote, and get a move on, or we won't fill our quota. I don't want to have to go back to the mines, end quote. He chopped down a few branches and dragged an enormous pile of green paws to the fire. I broke off the smaller branches and started with the top of each branch, pulled off the needles together with the bark. They looked like green fringe. Quote, you'll have to work faster, end quote, said my companion, returning with a new armload. I could see that the work was not going well, but I couldn't work faster. There was a ringing in my ears, and my fingers, frostbitten at the beginning of winter, ached with a familiar dull pain. I yanked at the needles, broke entire branches into smaller pieces without stripping the bark, and stuffed the product into the sack. The sack wouldn't fill. Before the fire rose, a mountain of stripped branches that looked like washed bones. But the sack kept swelling and swelling and accepting new armfuls of needles. My companion sat down next to me, and the work went faster. Quote, "It's time to go," end quote, he said suddenly. Quote, "Or else we'll miss supper. We haven't got enough here for the quota," end quote. He took from the ashes of the fire a large stone and shoved it into the sack. Quote, "They won't untie them there," end quote, he said, frowning. Quote, "Now we've met our quota," end quote. I stood up, scattered the burning branches, and kicked snow onto the red coals. The fire hissed and went out, and it immediately became cold. It was clear that evening was close. My companion helped me heave the sack onto my back. I staggered under its weight. Quote, "Try dragging it," end quote, my companion said. Quote, "After all, we're going downhill, not up," end quote. We barely arrived in time to get our soup. No meat or vegetables were given for such light work. Oh gosh. So that was the story. Basically, everything is complete, horrible, terrible misery. Oh my god! And you don't even get fed food. You actually just get broth. Jesus Christ! All right. Wow. It's pretty intense. Well, it looks like we are. Oh, frickin' Sin is here. Hey, buddy, what's it going down? Let's see. He says BRB 5 min. So I'm not sure if Sin is going to be around for it, but if he is, I might send a link. I'm going to generate one, just in case. Just in cases. So yeah. Anyway, this is one hell of a book thus far. I'd like to just make a little side note that it's funny. The dwarf cedar. It sounds like it's being described as a metaphor for the soul of Russia, where it's like it's able to endure quite a lot, and it's alive, it's bright, it's sprightly, and it's a survivor. I think that's the direction that they were going with that one, and I like it. That's actually pretty positive, and I do dig it. So, geez. I'm genuinely looking forward to going to the rest. I think that since it's 11:49 my time, I am a little bit tired. I think, let's see here, he said that 10 minutes ago. Perhaps he is, yeah, correct, Jonathan Pohl. My impression is that is the easy work. The few things that I've learned about things like the gulags and whatnot is that they basically worked people to death, and the ability to survive was, it seems like it was based on cunning, like your ability to somehow figure out how to do exactly enough work that you wouldn't end up destroying your body by accident, because a lot of it usually comes down to calories in, calories out. So you would have to do things like figure out how to cut calories here and there, or cut calorie expending. Yeah, cut calorie expense. So anyhow, I'm not seeing Sin, so I'm thinking that Sin is probably like off doing a thing. So I'm gonna play one more track. Let's see what we can find. That story wasn't too bad. I was expecting something a bit worse, but then again, I suppose we are at the very, very beginning of the very beginning of all of this. So I expect the later stories to get a hell of a lot more intense very, very quickly. So let's see. I'm gonna play Let's see, that's a bit much. I don't want to play that. I guess I could play some. I guess I could play some Esprit. I'm gonna play some George Clanton. I haven't played this track either ever or in a very long time, so I'm just gonna play this. This is End of Summer or something like that. Let me check the title of this track one more time. Summer Night. Check. The name of this track is Summer Night. It's the end of summer now, and that's why I'm thinking end of summer. My bad. Okay, so this is Summer Night by George Clanton. I'll be back in just a few moments. Alright, so that was George Clanton. Let's move back to the main. There we are. Yeah, so it looks like I'm not seeing Sin here, which is entirely too bad. And let me see what's going on with the very next story. That one was from 21 to 26. The next story is only a couple of pages long. I might rather read one more. So the first one was what, like 5-6 pages, something like that anyway. The next one is much shorter. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 pages, and this one is but 3 pages long. So I think I'm gonna read one more story. I'm gonna read one more. So a recap for the two new people that just popped in. Hello, how's it going? Hey everybody. Yeah, Goose Whisperer. Jonathan Pohl did respond. Yeah, I can see both Jonathan Pohl and Goose Whisperer, so it seems odd, very peculiar. I don't know what to make of that. Ooh. Excuse me. So, alright, yeah, for the two new people that just popped in, I'm going through Kolyma Tales by Varlam Shalamov. This is basically a companion to Gulag Archipelago. So let's see here, Vercingetorix. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with pronunciation. My apologies. You even typed it out like last night. What was it? Vercingetorix? I think that's what it was, right? Vercingetorix? I may end up saying bear. It's so embarrassing. Anyway. But yeah, this is a companion piece to Gulag Archipelago. So this is all about the absolute crazy talk that is communism. So here we are. Okay. All right. This one, I think this will be the last story that I read tonight because I am a little bit tired. So anyhow, this one is entitled In the Night. So here we go. Supper was over. Slowly, Glebov licked the bowl and brushed the breadcrumbs methodically from the table into his left palm. Without swallowing, he felt each miniature fragment of bread in his mouth coated greedily with a thick layer of saliva. Glebov couldn't have said whether it tasted good or not. Taste was an entirely different thing, not worthy to be compared with this passionate sensation that made all else recede into oblivion. Glebov was in no hurry to swallow. The bread itself melted in his mouth and quickly vanished. Bagretsov's cavernous, gleaming eyes stared into Glebov's mouth without interruption. None of them had enough will power to take his eyes from food disappearing in another's mouth. Glebov swallowed his saliva, and Bagretsov immediately shifted his gaze to the horizon, to the large orange moon crawling out onto the sky. Quote, "It's time," end quote, said Bagretsov. Slowly they set out along a path leading to a large rock and climbed up onto a small terrace encircling the hill. Although the sun had just set, cold had already settled into the rocks that in the daytime burned the soles of the feet that were bare inside the rubber galoshes. Jeez. Glebov buttoned his quilted jacket. Walking provided no warmth. Quote, "Is it much farther?" end quote, he asked in a whisper. Quote, "Some way," end quote, Bagretsov answered quietly. They sat down to rest. They had nothing to say or even think of. Everything was clear and simple. In a flat area at the end of the terrace were mounds of stone dug from the ground and drying moss that had been ripped from its bed. Quote, "I could have handled this myself," end quote. Bagretsov smiled wryly. Quote, "But it's more cheerful work if there are two of us. Then, too, I figured you were an old friend," end quote. They had both been brought on the same ship the previous year. Bagretsov stopped, quote, "Get down or they'll see us," end quote. They lay down and began to toss the stones to the side. None of the rocks was too big for the two men to lift, since the people who had heaped them up that morning were no stronger than Glebov. Bagretsov swore quietly. He had cut his finger, and the blood was flowing. He sprinkled sand onto the wound, ripped a piece of wadding from the jacket and pressed it against the cut, but the blood wouldn't stop. "Poor coagulation," Glebov said indifferently. Quote, "Are you a doctor?" end quote, asked Bagretsov, sucking the wound. Glebov remained silent, but the time when he had been a doctor seemed very far away. Had it ever existed? Too often the world beyond the mountains and the sea seemed unreal, like something out of a dream. Real were the minute, the hour, the day, from reveille to the end of work. Reveille? Reveille? From reveille? R-E-V-I-L-L-E. Strange. From reveille to the end of work. He never guessed further, nor did he have the strength to guess, nor did anyone else. He didn't know the past couple of people who surrounded him and didn't want to know. But then, if tomorrow Bagratzev were to declare himself a doctor of philosophy or a marshal of aviation, Glebov would believe him without a second thought. Had he himself really been a doctor, not only the habit of judgment was lost, but even the habit of observation. Glebov watched Bagratzev suck the blood from his finger, but said nothing. The circumstance slid across his consciousness, but he couldn't find or even seek within himself the will to answer. The consciousness that remained to him, the consciousness that was perhaps no longer human, had too few facets and was now directed toward one goal only, that of removing the stones as quickly as possible. Quote, "Is it deep?" end quote, Glebov asked when they stopped to rest. Quote, "How deep can it be?" end quote, Bagratzev replied. And Glebov realized his question was absurd, that of course the hole couldn't be deep. Quote, "Here he is," end quote, Bagratzev said. He reached out to touch a human toe. The big toe peered out from under the rocks and was perfectly visible in the moonlight. The toe was different from Glebov's and Bagratzev's toes, but not in that it was lifeless and stiff. There was still very little difference in this regard. The nail of the dead toe was clipped, and the toe itself was fuller, softer than Glebov's. They quickly tossed aside the remaining stones heaped over the body. Quote, "He's a young one," end quote, Bagratzev said. Together, the two of them dragged the corpse from the grave. Quote, "He's so big and healthy," end quote, Glebov said, panting. Quote, "If he weren't so fattened up," end quote, Bagratzev said, quote, "they would have buried him the way they bury us. And there would be no reason for us to come here today," end quote. They straightened out the corpse and pulled off the shirt. Quote, "You know the shorts are like new," end quote, Bagratzev said with satisfaction. Glebov hid the underwear under his jacket. Quote, "Better to wear it," end quote, said Bagratzev. Quote, "No, I don't want to," end quote, Glebov muttered. They put the corpse back in the grave and heaped over it the rocks. The blue light of the rising moon fell on the rocks and the scant forest of the taiga, revealing each projecting rock, each tree, in a peculiar fashion, different from the way they looked by day. Everything seemed real, but different than in the daytime. It was as if the world had a second face, a nocturnal face. The dead man's underwear was warm under Glebov's jacket and no longer seemed alien. Quote, "I need a smoke," end quote, Glebov said in a dreamlike fashion. Quote, "Tomorrow you'll get your smoke," end quote. Bagratzev smiled. Tomorrow they would sell the underwear, trade it for bread, maybe even get some tobacco. My gosh. Well, so this is the end of story time. So that's life in the gulags. You end up robbing bodies so that you can sell the clothing for cigarettes and food. Alright, with all of that, I am going to let out, and I think what I'll do is play an album. I would like to play an album. And let's see here. We've got this. Gonna remove. Okay. Check. Source. Yes. And I think what I'll do is play something that's just a hair more chipper, because that was actually kind of depressing. Let's see. These are all a bit. Yeah, I kind of want to. Yeah, I'm gonna play some Mitch Murder. I'm gonna play Mitch Murder. He's easy. I know what I'm getting when I play some Mitch Murder, so that's gonna be what we play. I love Mech Hunter, so we're gonna play Mech Hunter. It's an easy album, and I love it a lot. All right, so yeah, I didn't do any case streaming, but in light of the gulags, I do not want to deal with freaking Bolsheviks, and I do think that exercising our God-given right to keep and bear arms, as enshrined in the Second Amendment, would be something worth thinking about when confronted with, say, Bolsheviks that want to put everyone they don't like in gulags. If one were to... Now, of course, the only reason that I would purchase a firearm, because I'm a good boy, I'm a good man, I like to plink, and that's about as far as I go. As a plinker, I do think that we ought to have in mind the 4 rules of firearms safety. Rule number 1. Always treat every firearm like it is loaded. Rule number 2. Never cover or sweep anything that you are not willing to destroy. Rule number 3. Your finger stays off of the trigger until your sights are on target. And the 4th and final rule is be aware of your target and what's beyond it. Safety first. And so, yeah, tomorrow we're going to go back to more of these Kolyma tales, so that we can hear more about the gulags. We can hear more about what the progressives have in store for us. So, at any rate, yeah, we're going to listen to some Mitch Murder, and this is a great time to brush and floss your teeth. All right, guys, cheers.